On my 18th birthday, my grandpa surprised me with a life-changing gift. He gave me a pretty huge amount of money to invest in my dream business. I had always wanted to start a custom stationery and office supplies business, from personalized planners to branded office kits. I ended up really getting into it in 2020 because I had nothing much to do. I love stationery and graphic design, and I had a small online business, but I really wanted to expand it and make it into something I could live off. I knew there was potential, especially with small companies needing affordable, customized products. I had the vision mapped out, the suppliers listed, and even some sample designs. That money from Grandpa was the final push I needed to bring my dream to life. But things didn't go as planned. Around that time, my brother, 31 male, had been out of work for almost 2 years. He jumped from job to job, but nothing ever stuck. Mostly because my brother cannot for the life of him follow rules. He'd always sleep in or not go to work without informing anyone. Not to mention, he also had dropped out of college and never really got his act together. He'd been floating from one bad decision to another, and my parents were constantly supporting him. They would pay his bills, buy him things, and let him stay with them without any responsibility. The guy was 26 at the time and still living off of them without a care in the world. It was frustrating to watch him blow every opportunity and rely on my parents to bail him out. According to them, he was just going through a rough patch and would get back on his feet soon. However, this rough patch seemed to stretch on forever. Like, I can literally tell you that I have been watching this behavior of his ever since he turned 16. When my parents found out about my birthday gift, everything changed. They wouldn't stop pressuring me to loan my brother the entire amount. They said that he was struggling because he was behind on bills and needed money to avoid getting evicted. Every time I said no, they made me feel like I was the worst person alive. They'd call me selfish and say that I owed it to him since family helps family. I finally gave in, but it wasn't because I thought it was the right thing to do. It was because the guilt became too heavy to carry. I figured my brother would pay me back soon and I'd still have time to get my business off the ground. The next day, I woke up thinking maybe I had done a good thing by helping my brother out. But before I even had a chance to feel good about it, my parents dropped another bombshell on me. They asked me to start paying them $2,000 in rent. Apparently, turning 18 meant I needed to start contributing to the household, even though I was still in school, had no job, and had just given my entire startup fund to my brother. It was like I was being punished for doing what they wanted in the first place. That's when everything hit me. They never cared about me or my dreams. They only saw me as a way to fix my brother's mess. I felt completely used, like my needs and goals were never something that they cared about or even attempted to know. I packed my things and left that week. I told myself I couldn't keep living like that, where I was just a backup plan for everyone else. I went no contact with my parents and brother from that day forward. The next few years were tough, but I poured everything I had into making my business a reality. I worked odd jobs while continuing to slowly build my company online and attend college at the same time. I designed logos, custom planners, office kits and all that, and eventually began partnering with small businesses that wanted my products. Things picked up faster than I expected. In year 2, I opened a small store, and by year 5, I had 2 locations and an amazing online presence. Then, out of the blue, my parents reached out. I hadn't spoken to them in years, so this was a shock. They were being really vague about why they wanted to talk. But after a while, they finally admitted that my brother was in some serious trouble. They were vague about it, but they told me that my brother was in a lot of trouble and that things had spiraled beyond what they could handle. They wouldn't say exactly what kind of trouble he was in, only that it was serious and that he desperately needed help getting out of it. They told me they were willing to pay me back double the amount I had loaned him years ago if I could step in and fix things. That caught me off guard. The way they said it, it wasn't just about money. They wanted me to use my business connections to help him out. I didn't know the full story, but from what I pieced together, it sounded like my brother had racked up gambling debts, failed in another business venture, and may have been involved in something illegal. They were hoping that since my company worked with a variety of businesses, maybe I could pull some strings and find him a job. I couldn't believe it. After everything they did, they had the nerve to come back and ask for more. They hadn't reached out to congratulate me on my success or even check on how I was doing. The only reason they were contacting me now was because they wanted me to fix my brother's problems again. I was furious, but also just really sad. It was like nothing had changed. They still only cared about my brother, and I was still just a tool they could use when things got bad. I thought about it for a moment, like I really thought about it. Could I help my brother? Honestly, yes. With the connections I had built in my industry, I probably could have found him some kind of work or opportunity. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They didn't reach out to check again, and not to mention, my brother never once tried to make things right with me or even acknowledge the fact that he essentially stole from me. He also had our parents come up to me instead of asking me for help himself. I knew that if I stepped in now, I'd be setting myself on fire to keep them warm. They hadn't changed. They still saw me as a backup plan for my brother's failures, and I wasn't about to let history repeat itself. I told them no, I'm not going to sacrifice what I've worked so hard for to bail out my brother. He made his choices, and I'm not responsible for cleaning up his mess. They tried to guilt trip me again, talking about family and how I was in a good place now so I could afford to help. But I stood my ground. I've worked too hard to let them drag me back into their drama, especially after the way they treated me. It's been a week since I told them no, and I haven't heard from them since. I'm starting to feel bad about it. I know it's not my responsibility, but part of me feels guilty for not helping. After all, my brother is still my family, and yeah, I know that I said that I wouldn't let their guilting tactics work on me, but I don't know. It's starting to eat away at me, and I feel like I'm going crazy. I guess I just need someone to tell me that I'm doing the right thing. So, AITA for not helping my parents and brother out because of something they did to me 5 years ago. Hey everyone, I'm back with an update. It's been 3 weeks since I posted, and I've had some time to think about things through. First off, I really appreciate all the responses, even the ones that didn't agree with me. It gave me a lot to consider. I noticed a few questions came up in the comments, so I'll try to address them before getting into the latest developments. Some of you asked if my parents specifically asked me for money when they reached out. No, they didn't ask for money outright. What they wanted was for me to use my business connections to help my brother. Apparently, his problems are a lot deeper than I initially thought. I don't know all the details. My parents were vague, but from what I gathered, my brother is involved in some kind of debt that's too big to fix with just cash. They think that my contacts in the business world can help him out of the mess. Honestly, I know that's just another way of theirs to drag me back into his chaos. Others asked if I felt guilty about cutting contact with them years ago, or if I ever missed my brother. I mean, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't hard at first. I felt guilty for a long time, wondering if I were a bad person for walking away from my family. But with time, I realized that staying in contact only enabled their behavior. And as for missing my brother, no, not really. The relationship was always one-sided, with me giving and him taking. And lastly, a lot of you asked why I even gave my brother the money. To be honest, I know that was a very dumb decision. But you have to understand I was only 18. I was still in high school and living with my parents. They never gave up on pressuring me to give my brother the money. I still have no idea how they found out about the money in the first place. But from the moment I woke up in the morning to when I went to sleep at night, that was all my parents talked about. They used every tactic they knew to make me feel guilty about not helping him. I kept some of the amount Grandpa gave me, but most of it I gave my brother because of how guilty my parents made me feel. Now, on to what happened recently. After my parents reached out asking for help, they went radio silent for about a week. I figured they gave up on me and found someone else to bail my brother out. But then, out of nowhere, they invited me to dinner to talk things through. I debated whether or not to go. Part of me thought it might bring closure if I faced them in person, but I also knew it would probably just be another guilt trip. In the end, I decided to go, not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted to see if anything had really changed. Spoiler alert, it hasn't. The dinner was at a local restaurant, which I found odd since my parents usually insisted on hosting things at home. I arrived and they were already seated and they were looking weirdly happy to see me. The whole vibe felt forced, like as if they were trying too hard to act normal. At first, things were civil. We exchanged some polite small talk, and I almost started to think maybe they were actually trying to reconnect without any ulterior motives. But that hope didn't last long. About halfway through dinner, the real reason I was invited came up. They weren't asking for money, but they still wanted me to use my success to help my brother. They said that since my business has connections with investors and some people in the financial world, I could make a few introductions that might help straighten things out for him. It wasn't a direct ask for cash, but it was still a favor I didn't want to get involved in. I could feel that old familiar feeling creeping back, the same feeling I had when they pressured me to give my brother the loan years ago. And just when I thought the conversation couldn't get worse, my brother showed up. He wasn't even supposed to be there, at least never mentioned that he'd be joining us. He just walked in, looking smug and acting like he owned the place. From the moment he sat down, it was clear he hadn't changed one bit. He was loud, arrogant, and completely unapologetic about the mess he'd gotten himself into. It was as if he expected me to roll out the red carpet and fix everything for him. He also, for some reason, acted like I owed him. He actually had the audacity to suggest that since I was so lucky with my business, it was only fair that I help him out. Like I should feel grateful for the opportunity he's given me to do good. He even made snide comments about how my business wouldn't have taken off if I hadn't loaned him the money back then. He genuinely thought that his failure somehow contributed to my success. Can you believe that? It took everything in me not to walk out right then and there. But the dinner was the final nail in the coffin for me. I realized that nothing had changed. My parents are still enabling my brother, and he's still the same entitled, selfish person he's always been. They're not looking for help because they care about me or respect how far I've gotten. They just see me as a solution to a problem they don't want to deal with themselves. After that dinner, I went straight home and blocked their numbers. I thought I'd feel guilty, but honestly, I just feel relieved. For the first time in a long time, I know I made the right decision. That's where things stand right now. I've cut them off for good this time, and I feel at peace with my decision. I know some people might think I'm being harsh, but I've learned the hard way that setting boundaries is necessary, especially with family. I'm finally putting myself first, and it feels good. I'll post another update if anything changes, but for now, I'm moving on with my life. Thanks again to everyone who gave advice. It really helped me see things clearly. Update 2. It's been about 6 months since my last update, and things have gotten even more complicated. I thought I had closed the door on this situation, but apparently my family isn't ready to let go. Since blocking my parents, I started getting messages from extended family, some aunts, uncles, and cousins telling me I was cold and heartless, for abandoning my brother when he needed me the most. A few even said that I've forgotten where I came from now that I've found success. It's frustrating, especially since none of these people offered to step up and help him themselves. At first, I ignored their messages and hoped they'd drop it, but the guilt started creeping in again, and I found myself wondering if I was being too harsh. I kept thinking, what if his situation is worse than I realized? So I unblocked my parents to try and get some clarity. As soon as I reached out, I found out just how deep my brother's mess really was. It turns out he owes over $90,000 in debt, mostly from gambling and some shady personal loans. When I heard the amount, I was floored. This wasn't just a small mistake or a string of bad luck. This was a disaster he had knowingly created. And the worst part, that money I gave him on my 18th birthday, the one my parents guilted me into giving him, was never used for rent. Instead, he blew it on gambling and a failed attempt to start some half-baked business. Learning that just made me angrier. All this time, I believed that the loan was at least helping him stay afloat, but no. He gambled it away, and now he's buried himself even deeper. My parents tried to downplay it, of course. They kept saying, everyone makes mistakes, and families should stick together. But I wasn't having it. I reminded them that they could just give him the money they promised to give me. Double the original loan, remember? That would help him pay down some of his debt. That's when even more truth came out. They admitted they never had the money to begin with. It was just a ploy to get me to step in, either with my own cash or my business connections. What they really wanted was for me to find him a high-paying job in my network so he could slowly work off his debt. I was furious. Not only had they lied to me, but they were also trying to shift the responsibility of fixing his mess onto me once again. Of course, I refused to help, and they didn't take it well. They said I was being selfish and that I needed to remember the importance of family. After I shut them down, they started contacting other relatives and twisted the story to make it seem like I was turning my back on them. I got bombarded with messages from cousins saying things like, "You're successful now. It wouldn't hurt you to help out." And, "He's your brother. Aren't you ashamed to abandon him like this?" It was exhausting. At that point, I realized I had to set some serious boundaries, not just with my parents, but with the rest of the family too. I responded to the relatives who reached out, and I told them that if they were so concerned about my brother, they could step up and help him out. None of them had anything to say after that. They just quietly stopped messaging me, which only proved to me that they weren't really interested in helping. They just wanted to guilt me into doing it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I kept replaying everything in my head, from how they forced me to give up the money on my 18th birthday to how they demanded rent from me the very next day. It hit me that the only reason they wanted me to pay rent was to probably give my brother even more money. They were just using me as another source of cash for my brother's lifestyle. I wish things could have been different with my parents and brother, but I've accepted that some relationships just can't be fixed. If they ever truly want to reconnect with me, it'll have to come from a place of respect and not manipulation. But for now, I'm done. I'm not going to let guilt or family pressure pull me back into a toxic situation. Thanks again to everyone who commented and shared advice. Your support has really helped me stay strong throughout this mess. I'll post another update if anything major happens, but for now, I'm moving forward and not looking back. Update 3. It's been a good while since my last update and things have somehow gone from bad to worse. I thought I had reached the end of this mess after blocking my parents and brother again, but it turns out they weren't done dragging me into their chaos. This time, they've decided to escalate things in the most ridiculous way imaginable. They're now threatening to take legal action against me. Yep, you read that right. My parents are now threatening to sue me for ruining the family. To give you some context, I recently found out that my brother's financial situation has become even more of a disaster. Honestly, I didn't even think that was possible considering how much my parents have been begging me to help him out. Apparently, he's deep in debt with loan sharks now. It's worse than just credit card debt or a few overdue bills. From what I've pieced together through some mutual contacts, these aren't the kind of people who just send friendly reminders for payment. He owes them tens of thousands of dollars and they're pressuring him hard. My parents, of course, are panicking, but instead of holding my brother accountable, they've decided that this is somehow my fault. My dad got another number and they began texting me through that. They've sent me multiple messages, all of which were ridiculous. But they essentially kept saying the same thing about me turning my back on my family. I didn't respond to them, so they've now resorted to sending me legal threats. Their texts say that they're considering suing me for emotional damages because I've broken the family bond and caused them immense stress. At first, I thought they were just bluffing. It sounded so absurd. Like, what judge is going to look at this situation and say, yes, your adult daughter who refused to cover your gambling son's debts is clearly responsible. But as the messages kept coming, they started making me feel uneasy. What if they really tried to drag me to court just to make my life harder? I decided it was time to consult with a lawyer because I just wanted to cover my bases. Thankfully, the lawyer reassured me that I had absolutely nothing to worry about. They explained that my parents and brother have no legal basis to sue me. I'm not financially responsible for my brother's poor choices, and emotional damages in cases like this are rarely taken seriously, especially since I've had no direct involvement with his debt. The lawyer also told me it was smart to block them earlier. They also suggested that I block them again and block all other numbers or accounts that they tried to contact me through, so there would be no way for them to harass me anymore. They also told me to keep a record of everything my parents and my brother said over text or call so that I could treat it as evidence of harassment. Knowing that I was legally in the clear was a huge relief. Still, the entire situation made me feel sick. It's hard to describe how exhausting this has been. It's like no matter how many boundaries I set, my parents keep finding new ways to try and drag me back into their mess. And the entitlement is just mind-blowing. They actually think it's reasonable to blame me, someone they've mistreated for years, for the fact that my brother gambled his life away. It's like they can't even comprehend the idea that he is responsible for his own actions. What hurts the most is that instead of trying to make things right, my parents have doubled down on manipulation and threats. They could have taken responsibility or even asked my brother to figure things out on his own, but no. In their eyes, it's easier to blame me than face reality. I feel angry, frustrated, and honestly, just drained. I keep asking myself how things got to this point, but deep down, I know that no amount of self-reflection will change who they are. This is who they've always been, people who expect me to fix everything without giving anything in return, and that's a reality I just have to accept. I don't know if there will be another update. Honestly, I hope this is the end of it. But if anything major happens, I'll be sure to let you all know. For now, I'm closing this chapter and moving forward. Update 4. It's been about a month since my last update, and things have taken another turn as expected. Just when I thought I'd heard the worst of it, I got some news from a mutual friend that my brother has now landed himself in legal trouble. This time it's serious. He's being investigated for fraud. Apparently, in addition to all the debt he racked up with loan sharks and his failed gambling ventures, he got involved in something shady to try to dig himself out of the hole. From what I've heard, it's linked to some sort of fraudulent scheme he participated in because he probably thought it was a quick way to make money. Now the police are involved, and he's being investigated for fraud. If he's convicted, there's a real chance he could be facing jail time. It's crazy how things have spiraled this far. I always knew he was irresponsible, but I never imagined it would escalate to the point where he's committing crimes. Unfortunately, it gets worse, and this time it's for my parents. They are now facing eviction because of him. From what I've been told, they took out loans and refinanced their home multiple times over the years to help him, which is probably so they could help cover his debts and bail him out of trouble. Now they're so deep in debt themselves that they're about to lose the house. Even though I had blocked them on all platforms, they managed to get a message to me through a relative. It was more of the same, a last-ditch effort to get me to step in and help. They didn't ask for money directly this time as well. Instead, they wanted me to use my resources and connections to find them a place to stay or help them fight the eviction. I hate that it's come to this for them. No matter what they've done to me, they're still my parents, and I don't wish homelessness on anyone. That being said, I can't get involved. I warned them over and over again that they were enabling my brother's behavior, but they refused to listen. They chose to sacrifice everything for him, even when they could have taken a step back and made him deal with his own mess. Now, they're dealing with the consequences of that decision, and as harsh as it sounds, it's not my responsibility to fix it. The fact that they're still trying to pull me into this, even after all the boundaries I've set, just proves that nothing has changed. They haven't learned, and they likely never will. My brother has always been their priority, and they continue to expect me to clean up after him, no matter how far he's fallen. I still feel some sadness for them, of course. It's hard to completely turn off those emotions. I mean, who wouldn't feel sad to hear their parents are about to lose their home? But at the same time, I know that helping them now would only drag me back into the same toxic cycle. They'd continue to rely on me to solve all their problems while never holding my brother accountable for anything. That's not a burden I'm willing to carry, no matter how much they try to guilt me. The hardest part of this whole situation has been sticking to my decision to stay out of it. There's always that small voice in the back of my mind that wonders if I'm being too cold or too harsh. But then I remind myself that I've done everything I could for them in the past, and none of it ever made a difference. They've made their choices, and I've made mine. At this point, I've also cut off contact with the relative who passed along the message. I know they meant well, but I don't need anyone trying to play the middleman and guilt me into caving. I've set my boundaries, and I am sticking to them. For anyone wondering, I've done a bit of digging, and it turns out The fraud investigation against my brother is quite serious. The police have been building a case for months now, and it doesn't look good for him. Whether or not he'll face jail time will only become clear later, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's where this all leads. It's hard to feel sorry for him at this point, especially because he's had countless chances to turn things around and he wasted all of them. I'm just going to continue to focus on protecting my mental health and my boundaries. This whole experience has been exhausting, and I think I'm long overdue for a break. Thanks again to everyone who's been supportive throughout this entire ordeal. This will likely be my final update, as I've decided to finally cut ties with everyone involved. I'm moving forward, and I'm at peace with my decision. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.